Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So, sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. If a coworker or colleague contacted you on social media, how do you tell if it's them or not? Keep listening. Welcome to episode 349. Is that your coworker or colleague contacting you on social media, or is it a fraudster? All right. So, first off, I have to tell a story because I am on Facebook and I have tried to get off Facebook many times, but the amount of babies being born and watching them grow, like I can't do that anywhere else but Facebook. So I am on there for now. Now, I have quite a few cousins, and a lot of them like to take those naming tests, like the last thing you ate and the color of your shirt is your superhero name, or what kind of queen would you be? I don't know, but all those types of naming tests or any kind of quizzes or that's supposed to be fun, fake Facebook stuff, and I almost call it fake book because that's what a lot of the people I know called it. But anyway, they take a lot of that, and those quizzes, they just collect information so they can do the same thing to all of their contacts. But okay, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get off Facebook, but that's fine. But anyway, I have a lot of cousins, and one cousin in particular, I keep getting like her profile just keeps being a target of the fraudsters. I get connection requests or friend requests from her, and that's in quotes, profile quite often, probably several times a year. And some of those will even reach out to me via Messenger and try to have a conversation with me, ultimately asking for money for something. And that is a personal, right, profile, personal request, and not necessarily professional. But fraudsters are on Facebook for professional reasons as well. So they're looking for the people that they know their titles based on their LinkedIn profile, right? They're looking for those folks. They're looking for the people that they are connected with. They're looking for different topics that they may like, different posts that they may like, just to get an understanding of what type of person they are, so that when they send that messenger, direct message via messenger, or they send that email, it's going to be that much more legitimate appearing because you have already discussed it on Facebook through Messenger, or you have already already shown to the fraudsters that you're interested in this subject or this particular topic. And so they use that information along with information that they gather from all social media accounts, including LinkedIn, so that again, when they send that email, it appears that much more legitimate. And that's probably not the way to say it, but it appears more legitimate. And not only are they looking for, who you're connected to, what topics you are, commenting on, liking, and maybe even reaching out to you via Messenger, DMing you directly. Um, they are not only doing that, but they're also looking at when, your coworkers or you are on vacation or leaving the office, because then they know exactly when to strike those that you leave behind. And a great example of that was back in February of 2020. Wow, we didn't even have a concept of COVID-19. At least I don't think so at that point. I know it all came to a head in March of 2020. But anyway, that back in February of 2020, Barbara Cochran, I think that's how you pronounce her name. Anyway, she's on the Shark Tank. I think they call her the Shark Lady or Shark Tank Lady. Anyway, she posted on Facebook that she was going out of town or going on vacation. And of course, the fraudsters were watching, looking at that. And so they knew they used that as the opportune time to spoof Barbara Cochran's assistant, her email address. It was not an email takeover. It was just, adding or changing a letter. I forgot what they did, but they spoofed it. It wasn't the actual email address. And so they sent an email from purportedly from her assistant to the bookkeeper and asked to wire almost $400,000, which the bookkeeper did. Now, it didn't say whether or not had Barbara Cochran been in the office, whether she would have approved it, but the fraudsters didn't know one way or other whether she would. And so they assumed that she would and took the opportunity, since she posted that she was going to be on vacation, to send that request through. And so the fraudsters are watching us. They're especially watching those folks like you that are in a position to make changes to the remittance information. And so they're just trying to get a leg up and get a connection. That fraudulent email, it will appear legitimate. So, one of the big ways they're doing that is they are creating fake profiles. And I know that is not something that we should be surprised about. Again, I talked about my cousin. It happens multiple times a year with her, but I am sure that happens with other people that you know, and maybe even some of your professional connections. And the next thing you know, you may be getting a DM on whatever platform. Let's assume it's Facebook. So a message may come through on Messenger that will try to establish a connection, a conversation, so that when you do get again that eventual email, it'll make it appear more legitimate. And just as an example too, I don't know if I said it before, but the cousin that I said has her profile faked, or has fake profiles of her real one set up multiple times a year. They do DM me through Messenger. And what I started doing is I started treating them just like I train in the authentication step of the authentication validation management process for it's a framework, and it's a 3-step vendor setup and maintenance process, because you have to know, right, who you're getting those documents from, or for that matter, who you're even given instructions for how to get set up or how to change vendor information. And so what I started doing is I started asking questions, or a question that would that person, right, my cousin, should know. And one of the questions I asked, well, what is my nickname? right? Because that's not something that she would necessarily say on Facebook because they don't call me that anymore. But, if that's something you can't use that, right? If that's something that everybody calls you on Facebook, but that's not something that she called me on Facebook because it was from our childhood. And so when that person didn't know it, that fraudster didn't know it. It's so funny. They just sent back a smiley face. So that ended that. And so you can do the same thing with your coworkers as well. There is always something that, between you and that coworker, especially if they're DMing you, that you should be close enough that you should be able to ask something that a fraudster wouldn't know, something that's not on that social media site or would not have been posted. And a great example on the business side of that with Ferrari. And so the Ferrari CEO, Benedetto Vigna, he was actually targeted as a deep fake clone of his voice. And so someone created a deep fake audio live of his voice, contacted his finance worker, and asked for a certain amount to be transferred. And so the finance worker, right, and I don't know if it said whether or not the finance worker thought it was suspicious or not, and could have been. But even if it's not suspicious, what I recommend that you do is what that finance worker did. And he said, I am sorry, Benedetto, but I have to identify you first. Now, notice that he said, I'm sorry because, right, they work together. It is a CEO, right, that the fraudster was deep faking the audio on. So it's not as if it was any other person, right? It is a high leadership. And what do we all try to do? We try to please them. But in this case, they were wiring, or that finance worker was wiring money, and so the question came out to identify them. So I like the fact that he took the initiative, even though it was a CEO, to ask the question, but he apologized first. So okay, fine. So anyway, he said, "I'm sorry, Benedetto, but I need to identify you first." And what he used, because he actually knew this person, knew the CEO personally, right? They had met in person before, and they had met a few weeks before at some function, and the CEO, Benedetto, had given him a recommendation for a book. Okay, so he asked him for the name of the book that he recommended that he read. And what did the fraudsters do? They hung up because they can't answer that question. So your goal is to make the fraudster, if they're calling you, make them hang up. If they are emailing you, make them abandon that email string. If they are DMing you on social media, make them abandon that message. Or like mine did when I did it with my cousin, send you that little smiley face. So make sure that you ask identifying questions, at least one, and make it something that would not be known publicly so that, again, you can make them abandon the request, get that little smiley face, whatever it is. Guess what? You have just thwarted a fraud that, had you not asked that, and a fraudulent email came through referencing that conversation and saying, here, make this change or make this payment. And you go through all your steps. You've got your internal controls in place. Now you got to go do your validations. Maybe you do find it as a part of, if you have that functionality available, finding or validating bank account ownership. Right. So maybe you find it then. But you know what? You could have saved yourself all of that time by just authenticating first. And again, you can do it via email, you can do it via phone, and you can also do it when the fraudsters are reaching out for or reaching out to you through social media. Now, if you want free training on authentication, that's what I'm talking about here. I do have in my three-step vendor setup and maintenance process workshop that is based on the authentication validation management framework. I do have the first section of that, which is authentication. That training is free, and it also comes with an authentication reference template. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes, and please sign up for that. And that reference template has room for not only vendor elements or pieces of data that you can ask to identify, if that is your vendor you're talking to and not a fraudster, but it also has another side that you can use to identify your internal team members when they're calling, right, when they're not calling on or contacting you on a company provided platform that will validate who they are. And so, but that's more of it asks questions from a business perspective. Keep in mind, you can always ask things like that finance worker did to Benedetto, right? What book did you recommend to me? And you can also do the same thing with your family as well, right? You can make sure that you're actually being contacted by a family member, again, by just asking them a question that is not out there in public that a fraudster wouldn't know. And if it still seems suspicious, if they answer the question correctly, have another question, right? Just keep going until it doesn't feel suspicious anymore. And I will just end on this story again, back from Facebook. But I had a prior colleague that was my same, actually, coworker. She was on my same level. We worked under the same finance director, and so I was a little suspicious about her profile. I think it had been taken over because I wouldn't have accepted it back in the day if it wasn't her. But that profile ended up contacting me or sending me a message via Facebook Messenger. And it was a little suspicious. And so I asked, what was the name of our finance director? And instead of sending back that smiley face, what the messenger did is, or the fraudster did, is they say, hey, you know what? It's me. You would have remembered if that was really that coworker, they would have remembered the finance director's name. And I even asked a further follow-up question. I did not get a response from that. All right. So I wanted to end on one last example of how you can make sure that it is your colleague or coworker contacting you on social media and not a fraudster. All right. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed the 349th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.